It started off as a genuine tragedy. 2 Washington, D.C. National Guard members shot. 1 dead, 1 critically wounded. The suspect, a 29-year-old Afghan man, granted asylum earlier this year. Within hours, President Trump declared this as proof that his hard line on immigration was not just right, it was overdue. He vowed to reassess every immigrant from what he called third world countries, tighten vetting, and deport those who do not belong. But something about that reaction doesn't quite add up. Today I want to dig into how this moment isn't just about security. It's about race, quota politics, and a political narrative built on fear. Happy holidays, everyone, and welcome to this week's supplemental installment of Back Porch Files from Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, and I am your host. Today, we're going to be talking about the renewed vigor of the mass deportations agenda of President Trump. If you've been paying any attention at all to the news, you know that after the shootings in D.C., Trump has ramped up that rhetoric to 11. Even if his logic, if we're going to call it that, is as weak as a snowflake in a sauna. So let's start with the big picture. Yes, ICE is working overtime in 2025. That is news to no one. Arrests are surging and deportations are climbing. But, and it's a big but, even this Blitz falls short of what Trump promised on the campaign trail. He painted a picture of mass removals, dramatic enforcement, a full reset. But the numbers, they don't quite match the rhetoric. Early in 2025, ICE and DHS reports suggest tens of thousands of removals, far more than under previous administrations in some respects, but still not the million a year tidal wave that was often alluded to in his campaign speeches. In other words, the scale is real, and it's a problem, but it's not total. And the gap is more than technical. It shows that his mission is about as much as messaging and optics as it is about enforcement. And that is going to be crucial as we continue on here. One of the most important things to understand is that many of the people being arrested and deported aren't criminals, at least not in any real sense. Violent criminals, the dangerous illegal immigrant that the framing always suggests. Some reporting shows a significant share of ICE detentions involve people without any criminal convictions. Advocacy groups and data trackers estimate a very high percentage. In some months, non-criminals make up half or more of arrests. That's where the quota system comes in. From multiple insiders and reports, ICE is under pressure to hit very high daily arrest targets. Under that kind of regime, volume becomes more important than judgment. You pick up people who are easy to detain, not necessarily the most dangerous. And because undocumented immigrants are disproportionately non-white, especially from Latin America, Africa, and Asia, this dragnet-style enforcement tends to hit non-white communities far more heavily. Structurally, the system is just not neutral. And when you compare the actual numbers to the promised numbers, you can understand why there would be a desire for the president and his administration to come up with a way to ramp things up even further, which is now what he's about to do. So let's talk about the shooting that set this all off. The suspect, Ramanullah Lakhanwal, a 29-year-old Afghan national. He came to the U.S. under Operation Allies Welcome in 2021, worked with U.S. affiliated forces in Afghanistan and later applied for and was granted asylum just this year. Now, here's the key. Despite Trump's post-shooting claims of lax vetting, Lakanwal underwent extensive security screening, both before he arrived and after. Counterterrorism agencies, including the CIA, the National Counterterrorism Center, vetted him. So much for the unvetted immigrant narrative. The system had placed a lot of checks on him, all of which we assume he passed. But that's not the full story. According to U.S. Homeland Security, there's a very possible theory now being taken seriously. Lakanwal was radicalized after coming to the United States. Secretary Kristi Noem explicitly says she believes he became radicalized through connections in his U.S. community. That raises disturbing questions. Are some of the very policies Trump is now weaponizing, his asylum reforms, his rhetoric, the isolation and fear his enforcement creates, playing into this radicalization? It's a possibility that doesn't get much play, but if true, it deeply undercuts his justifications. Next is the hypocrisy factor. And this is a point that hits hard. While the guard shooting is undeniably tragic, Trump's reaction reveals a serious double standard, especially when it comes to gun violence. When the shooter is an immigrant from a non-white country, we get sweeping reforms, mass deportation talk, and national security rhetoric. But when school children die in mass shootings carried out by white perpetrators, where is that same fury? Where is the immediate, we must overhaul our system type of reaction? Historically, his response to those tragedies has been muted, to say the least, more focused on mental illness or even blaming the internet, but rarely on sweeping policy change. This selective outrage isn't just political, it's racialized. It signals that when violence is linked, in his framing, to foreignness, he can justify dramatic collective punishment. But when violence comes from certain domestic sources, there's much less appetite to act systematically. This isn't just about security policy. It's about who is deemed threatening and who is not, based on origin, not just on behavior. Once you include the DC shooting in the broader narrative, what you see is a deeply racialized logic at play. First of all, quotas and politicized enforcement. The arrest pressure means ICE is acting more like a number factory than a justice system. People become raw material for a political agenda. Number two, racialized vetting. The new rules after the shooting explicitly allow negative country-specific factors in vetting for 19, quote, high-risk countries. That's not neutral. That's targeting by origin. Number three, selective security panic. This very specific act of violence is being used to justify a broad crackdown, but the person at the center of it was screened deeply. That suggests the panic may be less about actual security gaps and more about fear politics. Number four, radicalization blind spot. If Lakanwal was radicalized after arriving, then the administration's own policies, isolation, scrutiny, exclusion, may be part of what fueled it. That possibility is not being fully acknowledged in the rush to impose tougher immigration rules. Number five, the moral risk. When policy is driven by this kind of panic, you end up with sweeping measures that punish whole populations, not because individuals did something wrong, but because they look like someone who did something wrong. They look like political targets. Now, given the way the Trump administration does things, it's easy to say that this is just political theater, but it's not. What's at stake is our definition of belonging in America. Who is seen as a threat and who is not? When immigration policy is weaponized based on race, nationality, and fear, it undermines the rule of law. When quotas drive enforcement, due process takes a back seat. We've seen it time and again. People become statistics and cease being individuals. When a tragedy like this is used as a justification for mass restriction, the policy risks becoming more about retribution and fear than it is about protection. And when we ignore how radicalization may happen within the U.S., we risk building systems that push people toward the very extremism that we claim to want to prevent. So here is what I think that we all should be thinking about and acting on. Question the framing. When you hear talk of lax vetting or terrorist threat, ask, what are the facts? Was this person vetted? What are we ignoring? Demand transparency. Call for clear data on deportations. Who is being arrested, for what, and what their national origins are. Support immigrant voices. These policies don't just affect abstract illegal aliens. They affect real families, real people. Amplify those stories. Watch for radicalization risk. Radicalization doesn't always come from abroad. Sometimes it's born right here through exclusion, isolation, and systemic fear. And above all, push for consistent moral leadership. If gun violence deserves a serious national response, then let's demand it, whether the shooter is foreign-born or homegrown, or regardless of what their skin tone is. Here's where we land. Trump's 2025 deportation blitz is not just about law enforcement. It's deeply racial, deeply political, and deeply tied to a vision of who belongs in America. The DC shooting has become a convenient justification, but when you look at the details, the narrative weakens. The suspect was vetted. He may have been radicalized here, and the response is being shaped not just by security concerns, but by fear quotas and a deeply selective moral frame. If we let fear dictate policy, we risk building a system that punishes entire populations because of political theater, not principle. And that is a very, very dangerous path. Thanks to everyone for downloading and listening to this installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left. I'm so glad to have your attention and want to thank you for it, and I'd love to hear from you too. You can reach out to the podcast through any of the social media platforms that the podcast uses. The links to those are all on the Linktree page, and the address to the Linktree page is in the episode description. You can also reach out via email. The email address for the podcast is neighboroTleftpodcast@gmail.com. We'll be back on Tuesday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.